cannabis. Doctor say make a pop one of this. Make me fly like say I'm Aladdin. Come bring some kind melodies. Oh mommy myself no do pass like this. So many things inside of my gin. Slide down DBTs, DBTs.
Good evening, test, test, one, two, three, nice, yes. Don't worry, not starting quite yet. My name is Karen Budasing, I'll be your host for this evening, and it's my pleasure to let you know that we will be starting in about 4.5 minutes. We'll be right back.
Okay, okay. Cheers.
We are ready. We are ready to go. Yes. I'm not going no small fet. Please accept my apologies. Only big fet with big flag going overhead like rag in my back pocket with a white vest, sneakers on. That's just a test, checking you guys out. Good evening, how's everybody doing this afternoon? Everybody's all right? All right. Nice, and welcome here again for an evening of celebration, an evening of sharing. And I want to give yourselves a round of applause for looking the way you do here this afternoon. I must say, it's a Friday evening. Yes, I see some of us are dressed for some activities afterwards. Me, myself, I may be heading out, heads, no socks, right? Yes, but at first, we must do the job. So I begin. Once again, my name is Karan Budu Singh, but some of you all may know me from radio as that character that annoys you on the morning called Tim Tim. Yes, that is my other side. But today, I have on a shirt, so I'll be Karan Budu Singh. Right. Okay, so we start this evening by first welcoming Mr. Kishan Kumar Singh, Head Multilateral Environmental Agreements at the Ministry of Planning and Development, Ms. Ruana Haynes, Director Climate Analytics Caribbean, Enrique Martura, and hold on, his name does that to me, guys. Whenever I have to pronounce his name, it usually throws my phone off, but I'm going to get it right now. Yes. Welcoming Mr. Enrique Martura, Coordinator, Independent Global Stocktake, Latin America and the Caribbean. Islands All In for GST 2023 Ambassadors, Mr. Kalain Hussain and Ms. Sagoni Mohammed. Our specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, good evening and welcome. It is my pleasure to be your host here for today's launch at Climate Analytics Caribbean Stocktake Global Caribbean Campaign, Islands All In for GST 2023. This is in partnership with the Independent Global Stocktake, and in the coming months, Climate Analytics Caribbean will be embarking on exciting, enlightening initiatives to enhance regional awareness of climate change impacts and how the global stocktake can advance the climate action our vulnerable islands critically need. We will be announcing regional webinars and events, a youth competition, community project sponsorship, and a documentary which will bring the science of climate change and impacts to life through our real Caribbean stories. Now, we have quite a bit to share this evening and a short space of time in which to do so. So this evening, every minute truly counts. Many thanks for taking the time to enjoy us here. I would now like to direct your attention to our screen as we set the backdrop for this evening and the months to come with a very, yes, I stress on that word, a very short film entitled Islands All In for GST 2023. Please enjoy.
Our islands, our home. The stories and songs our ancestors' dreams of a brighter tomorrow, all embedded in our soil and sand. But their footprints are fading as the earth warms and the tides rise. We risk losing what we love. Climate change is a crisis our islands did not cause, impacts that threaten our very existence. Small island developing states and low-lying coastal territories are among the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. But we're working to make a change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Global Stocktake provides an essential way for the world to counter the climate crisis. Here's how it works. All countries within the UN made the Paris Agreement aiming to cut emissions and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Global Stocktake, GST, is how we keep track of collective progress so we can ramp up our efforts to avoid the worst of climate change impacts. First step, collecting and preparing information. Then, technical assessment. The thematic areas are mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation and support. At COP28, outputs will be presented with the decision guided by equity and the best available science. Our loved ones will not lose out on their legacy. Our islands will endure. The Global Stocktake. Islands all in for GST 2023.
I think it deserves a round of applause. Yes. Well done. And this has set the tone for a meaningful and hearty discussion on the Global Stocktake 2023. What it is, what it means for our very survival. To share further insights is our first speaker of the evening, Ms. Ruana Haynes. She is the Director, Climate Analytics Caribbean, and is an experienced international climate law and governance specialist. With a prominent background in climate and multilateral environmental negotiations, Ms. Haynes has participated in the UNFCCC for several years on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago and has served as lead negotiator on climate and sustainable development fields for CARICOM, the Alliance of Small Island States, and G77, just to name a few. There's an entire paragraph here again that is dedicated just to the accomplishments of this young lady, but I would just like you guys to welcome her on this stage with a resounding round of applause, because her presence speaks for itself. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Haynes.
Hi everybody, good evening. Thank you, Karen. I thought Bianca had given you the shorter version. So let me first start off by saying happy Earth Day to everybody and a happy or Eid Mubarak to everyone. I know we're a day early in terms of Earth Day and a day early in terms of Eid in Trinidad and Tobago, but as we say here, it's the night before the holiday, and so the holiday has already begun. On behalf of Climate Analytics Caribbean, let me thank you all for coming out tonight to this important event. As Karen said, we have quite a bit in store for you this evening and not much time, so I don't presume to be very long. So it's my job tonight to introduce you to our work at Climate Analytics Caribbean and to provide a context for the evening's event. So Climate Analytics is a global climate science and policy institute that has been working around the world to enhance climate action to limit global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. We connect science and policy to empower vulnerable countries in their efforts to address climate change. At Climate Analytics Caribbean, established in 2021 in Trinidad and Tobago, the focus of our work is on climate justice, specifically as it relates to bridging the gap between the global climate change negotiations, the discussions at the international level, and action at the local, national, and regional levels. In this vein, we are honored to introduce you to our latest work on the Global Stocktake. So what is the Global Stocktake about? So in 2015, when member states of the United Nations got together and agreed the Paris Agreement, they also agreed 3 key goals of that agreement. The first of which is to limit the average increase in global temperatures to within 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Now there is a reference in there as well to 2 degrees Celsius, which was the previous goal, but the way we interpret that particular article of the Paris Agreement is that there is only one goal, and that goal is to limit temperatures to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we'll get into the science of climate change a little bit later so that you'll understand that there is a really big qualitative difference between warming at 2 degrees Celsius and the resulting impacts that people will experience everywhere, especially those of us on the front lines of the climate crisis, and 2 degrees Celsius. The UN Secretary General, the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have both said that every fraction of a degree matters when it comes to the impacts that will be experienced in relation to climate change. So that was the first goal. The second goal is in relation to adaptation and the need to enhance the resilience of people everywhere to the impacts of climate change. That goal is probably, I don't know if it's the least specific. It's definitely a lot less specific than limiting to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so we are actually involved in a process right now to further unpack and understand what we've actually agreed to in the context of a global goal on adaptation. That work is ongoing and expected to conclude this year in December in Dubai at COP28. The third goal is in relation to finance, and it speaks to aligning all finance, all climate finance with the Paris Agreement goals. Again, a very unspecific goal, which we are still in the process of unpacking. We are beginning discussions on this article of the Paris Agreement this year with workshops to understand what actually needs to be done in order to be able to align those financial flows. Because this speaks to the entire global financial architecture, it speaks to how development funding is channeled, it goes directly to how developing countries are able to receive assistance in their efforts to sustainably develop. So we had those three headline goals of the Paris Agreement, and even when we agreed them, we already knew that we were not on track as a global community to actually be able to achieve them. A lot of work has actually been done between then and now in terms of trying to raise the collective global levels of climate action, to raise the level of ambition. So countries have submitted what we refer to as nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement that set out their mitigation actions primarily, but also address their adaptation actions and finance in relation to climate change. And we've done a lot of work to actually add up what the sum total of those NDCs would get us to. We've done this in various contexts, but most notably in the context of the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. Their latest sixth assessment report is very sobering. According to the IPCC, we have two gaps. We have a gap in terms of what countries have said they will do in the context of their nationally determined contributions. Those actions that have been communicated fall drastically short in every way. And we also have a gap in implementation. So not only have countries lowballed their level of ambition, they are also not implementing what they said they would do in the context of those commitments, those announcements. And because of those two gaps, there are a few things that we have to reckon with. The first is that, as a result, we are very much off track in terms of being able to limit global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. In fact, we are on track for warming of about 3 degrees Celsius. In a best case scenario, if we can address the implementation gap, if countries even did what they said they were going to do, we could get it down to 2.7 degrees Celsius. But this in itself is still a disaster. For example, even with 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global warming above pre-industrial levels, we lose about 70% of coral reefs globally. Now, this is quite catastrophic, not just for the loss of the coral reefs, but all of the losses that are linked to that in terms of the socioeconomic, but also the other benefits that coral reefs give to coastlines around the world. It will trigger events that we cannot reverse, such as sea level rise. We will continue to lose coastlines. It will change life as we know it on the planet. And this is at 1.5 degrees Celsius. At 2 degrees Celsius, it is a virtual certainty that we will lose all coral reefs globally. So that's the difference. That's just one example of the difference between the two. The Global Stocktake process was designed in order to help us as a global community to be able to bridge those gaps. And so the idea is, and this is a part of what we refer to as the ambition cycle of the Paris Agreement, every 5 years, the international community would get together, they would assess where the gaps are, specify what those gaps are, and then design actions to respond to addressing those gaps. Alongside those actions, alongside the technical assessment process that is being done, there is also a political process where heads of state and government will get together, are supposed to get together to basically establish a new foundation for international cooperation on climate change. They are supposed to get together and have a major political moment during the year when the GST is being finalized to be able to respond as governments to what the science is saying, to where the gaps are. And so the GST is essentially a two-track process. It is running along a technical track where we look at what the gaps are, we specify where those gaps are, we look for solutions, we look at best practices, we try to understand what are the barriers to implementation, what are the enablers, we try to understand how we can scale the best practices. And then you have the political track where governments come into play, heads of state come into play to basically answer the question, so what next? So what now? We know where the gaps are, what are you going to do about it? So this process has been quietly underway within the UN system since 2021, and it is coming to an end this year in Dubai at COP28. With the support of the independent Global Stocktake program, tonight we launch our regional communications program campaign around the GST. Because even though this is a process that is international, in the first instance, none of it will matter if there is not at the same time actual action on the ground. So a response within countries, a response at the national level, a response at the regional level. And needless to say, at this stage, we're very well aware that there is almost no information around what this process is, what it's designed to do, why it's important, how people can participate, and this is actually the gap that we're trying to address. We have worked alongside other civil society organizations based in Trinidad and Tobago and operating in the region, such as CANARI, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, and through our work with them in the context of their Climate Justice Alliance, we have actually agreed a submission that has been made to the global process on behalf of Caribbean civil society organizations on climate justice. The intention of this submission is to contribute to the discussion that is taking place at the international level, keeping in mind that that discussion has to occur in the context of both equity and the best available science. At the international level, we have not agreed what equity means. And so imagine we have to come up with an outcome for this key process based on equity, based on the best available science. And if you ask any two states within the UN process what they understand by equity, you will get a different response. So for some, equity means that if we look at what each individual person is doing around the world, every individual has to do more, every individual has to do better. The people who can afford to take vacations every single year, maybe they can't do that because there are other people who have nothing to eat. So some countries understand equity as a very personal individual responsibility. Other countries understand equity in the context of historical responsibilities. And so how did we get here? How did we get here? Right? We understand that the Industrial Revolution and everything that happened in that process to date is what got us here. And so for some countries, we have to look at those industrialized, developed nations who have benefited off of all of the emissions that they've put into the atmosphere for hundreds of years, who have benefited from that, for them to take the lead, for them to do the hard things, for them to show that they are willing to stop their dangerous actions in order to save the rest of us. So for some countries, that's equity. And I'm sure you can see that those two ideas aren't necessarily consistent at all. And so as the Caribbean, as civil society organizations involved in this process in the Caribbean, we have made a submission on climate justice to try to cut through the noise and to try to cut through the divide between, is it an individual responsibility? Is it a responsibility only for developed countries? Who is really responsible? What does it mean to say that we have to act together to address this issue. So with that, I'll stop there. And maybe I'll end with a call to action. Every time we have events like this one, and every time I participate in events where we are speaking to the public, educating people about the climate crisis and what they can do, we consistently get the same question. Okay, all of that is great, but do tell me what I can do as a person. How can I help? How can I contribute to this? And the answer to that at this stage is advocacy. We are in a situation where we desperately need people to educate themselves, to take the opportunities like this, to actually understand the issues at stake, and then to relentlessly advocate for action. Because at the end of the day, even though we are from a region that is on the front lines of the climate crisis, there is still much that has to be done by our own governments in terms of their response, in terms of building resilience, in terms of protecting people. And if we do not have engagement at the community level, at the individual level, then the government responses will continue to fall short. So if it's one thing I would like everybody to take away with you this evening, is the need for all of us to become advocates on this issue of climate change. Do enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
A true warrior for her cause. Let's get another round of applause for her, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Nice. Y'all heard that? No coral reefs. No Boko Reef by? Nah, man. Can't have that at all. Moving right along, we are privileged to have our next speaker, the head of multilateral agreements at the Ministry of Planning and Development, Mr. Kishan Kumar Singh. Now, just a little bit about this gentleman. I'll wait for we get that seating in order. Yes. Good evening and welcome. Yes, man. All right. Moving on, we have the head of multilateral agreements at the Ministry of Planning and Development, Mr. Kishan Kumar Singh. For the past 2 decades, Mr. Kumar Singh has served our country as Trinidad and Tobago's lead climate negotiator, having chaired and facilitated numerous international negotiations for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He is the national focal point and lead on climate policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Kumar Singh.
Thank you very much. Let me first off follow Ruana's lead by wishing you Eid Mubarak, but I'll probably not wish you a happy Earth Day, because quite frankly, there's nothing to be happy about. And every day should be Earth Day in any event. And why should we not be happy? I mean, you just have to look around, look at BBC, look at CNN, look at the recent global events in Europe, in China, Australia, US. And you see the climate chaos that is happening. We are also witnessing the alarming rates of increases in emissions of greenhouse gases. Ruana did make mention about the 1.5 degree goal, and what is even more unsettling is the fact that we are currently at 1.1 degrees rise above pre-industrial levels, and we are likely to meet 1.5. We are likely to meet 1.5. We are at 1.1. We are likely to meet 1.5 within the next decade and a half or so. She made reference to coral reefs. I always like to give this story. She stole my story, I should say. I like to give this story that, you know, we often listen to tales and stories about Jurassic Park and all of the wonderful creatures that existed then. Well, in your lifetimes, and I think many young people here, in your lifetimes, you will probably be showing pictures of corals to your grandchildren, saying that these wonderful creatures also existed in my lifetime. Because by the time you get to, I wouldn't say my age, but by the time you have grandchildren who would appreciate things like the environment, the coral reefs are likely to be gone and only captured in your imagination and in pictures. So, as Rana said again, the science is unequivocal. SIDS, small island developing states, are the first victims. We're already experiencing chaotic climate variability and change, and loss and damage in some sectors. The world, of course, got together in 2015 to remedy or try to remedy some of the emerging crises that was presenting itself to the world at that time. And having been involved in the negotiations, it was not an easy negotiations. I actually chaired those negotiations in 2013, 2014. But Paris Agreement basically was a victory in all forms and all fashions. It was the turning point actually in climate change diplomacy, because as Rana said, there was this notion of historical responsibility of those who were emitting were responsible, and therefore those who were not emitting were the victims and so on, which is largely true and basically forms the basis of equity in the minds of some states. But what the Paris Agreement did was it demonstrated that there is no longer that strict divide between the North and South, between developed countries and developing countries. The geopolitical landscape evolved and continues to evolve. So, for example, the G20, which constitutes the world's most developed economies and emerging ones, accounts for about 80% of global GDP, about 75% of international trade, and 60% of the total world population. And by no surprise, accounts for between 75 and 80% of global emissions. So when we talk about responsibility, the sharp divide between North and South, between developed countries and developing countries, has been blurred to a large extent. The Paris Agreement, of course, recognizes that every country then has to do its fair share, from the most advanced OECD country to the least developed country, island state somewhere. They have to demonstrate mitigation ambition. They have to show that they are contributing to the solution. That does not, of course, detract from the primary responsibilities of developed countries in providing finance and technology and building capacities in developing countries. And those commitments are, for all countries, reflected in the nationally determined contributions, as was said before. But now, every country also has to account internationally for its NDC and whether they are achieving it or not, and why they are not achieving it. And that is part of the enhanced transparency framework. That will feed into the global stocktake that is the subject of this gathering here this evening. So the global stocktake, therefore, is a critical moment in transparency and accountability for countries to own up to their actions and to take further action on course correction or what needs to be done to fill the gaps. I think Rana said it. We are not where we should be, and we are not headed to where we should be headed. No one speaks of 2 degrees in the Paris Agreement. Again, everyone speaks to 1.5. You hardly hear anything about 2 degrees. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago is also taking its own stock, in a manner of speaking. And we have developed over the years a very proactive climate agenda aimed at harmonizing climate action with national development, which is consistent with the government's recognition that climate change is a national development issue. Our nationally determined contribution, as many of you would know, addresses emissions in the power generation, industry and transportation sectors, and perhaps is the most ambitious NDC in the region. It also contains an unconditional, meaning not conditional on receiving finance, international finance, an unconditional commitment to reduce emissions in the public transportation sector. So accordingly, for us here, the approach is to develop the requisite policy, legislative, institutional and administrative enabling environment to facilitate ambitious climate action as a holistic approach. Because you can have all the finance in the world, if your own domestic situation does not allow you to implement actions, the finance will mean nothing. So that's, as a first step, is where we are headed. So to this end, we have undertaken and achieved several actions. So we have, as you may know, a national climate change policy which was laid in Parliament in 2011 and has a built-in revision clause for it to be revised every 5 years. That would have brought us to 2016. But if you go back in the chronology, 2016 was the year in which the Paris Agreement entered into force. So we took the decision there was no point in revising the climate change policy at that time because the Paris Agreement was now very new on the block, and so we waited for the modalities to be developed to implement the Paris Agreements and so incorporate that into the climate change policy, which is now done. I'm happy to announce, and hopefully soon will be adopted and laid in Parliament. So stay tuned. As part of the policy framework as well, it's not only about adaptation and mitigation as the two broad branches of climate change action, but it's also about what has come to be known as the just transition. The just transition, I speak of equity, and the just transition of the workforce. And this is an issue. This is just transition is just a new word, Ruana, for response measures, which was an old bugbear in the negotiations, where it is now consistent with the principle of no one being left behind. So that when we transition to a low energy economy, those who depend on the energy industries and oil and gas and so on will be retooled, will be reskilled, will be reschooled to embrace the skills that would be required in a low carbon economy. But it's not only about mitigation. So we also recognize that there are persons who will be disenfranchised by the adverse impacts of climate change. So persons who depend on conch and cascadoo and some of the natural resources for sustainable livelihoods. If climate change impacts on those resources, then they will also be disenfranchised, but for totally different reasons. So part of the just transition argument from our part, on our side, is that no one should truly be left behind, and so that everyone, whether you are employed in the oil and gas and preparing for the new dispensation, or whether you are disenfranchised from the adverse impacts of climate change, all should be given equal and fair treatment in keeping with the principle of equity, so that no one is left behind. Similarly, for the transportation sector, we are in the process of finalizing an e-mobility policy. Several things have, that is for electric vehicles. Some things have gone ahead in a good way, a very good way. So you would have heard in the budget recently, in the last budget I think it was, that the taxes and the import duties on electric vehicles have been removed. That is to bring price parity relative to ICE vehicles. It still remains really more expensive. Hopefully more will be done to reduce the cost of electric vehicles. We are in the process of developing the charging infrastructure to ease anxieties related to range anxiety and so on. My own argument is that it's not necessary, but if it quells your anxiety, then fine, because the average electric vehicle, the mid-range affordable sedan for the average driver covers about 245 to 300 kilometers on a single charge. No one is doing that kind of driving in a small island on a daily basis, but it is left to experience. We had the same problem with the CNG switching program, and so we had these CNG filling stations everywhere, but that is also being addressed. In terms of developing the legislative landscape and accounting for our NDC as part of the Global Stocktake inputs and the Enhanced Transparency Framework, we have developed an operational monitoring or measurement, reporting and verification system for mitigation, for greenhouse gas, for tracking our greenhouse gas emissions, and for tracking our NDC achievement and implementation, for which we will be held accountable internationally as part of the Enhanced Transparency Framework modalities. And so that is currently being managed by the Environmental Management Authority, and we have quite a few actually volunteers from industry now submitting data. But to ensure that everyone is accountable, we have developed draft legislation to incorporate this MRV system into law to make reporting mandatory. That soon will be going forward to the higher-ups, to the policymakers to ponder upon, and so it will be subject to further consultations to refine some of the provisions that we have developed. Additionally, we have also recognized that because, as Ruana said, we are on track for 3 degrees rise in temperature 2.7 at best for the existing entities, maybe 2 with some more ambition. That goalpost keeps shifting. So the long-term adaptation needs is very uncertain. There is no benchmarking as to what we could, okay, so what do we plan for? Do we plan for 1.5? Do we plan for 2? Do we plan for 2.7? 3, 4 maybe? So our approach has been what we call a pathways approach, where we, in recognition of the fact that climate change is a national development issue, that we build and we integrate climate change into the resiliency of sectors. So it is an iterative process where you have climate risk assessment, you identify intervention options, you implement, you monitor, you evaluate, and you revisit, because the risks will not go away. They will come back in a return period, maybe at a greater intensity and severity. But it provides the space to assess and to revise and to revisit. So we are also integrating that into the various policies of the sectors, because we recognize that this has to be a harmonious, all of government, all of society approach, and that a bottom-up approach is really where you require action to build that climate resiliency. However, some of the challenges is that some of the ministries, divisions and agencies continue to operate in silos, not recognizing that climate change is any of their business. It's not within their mandate in the written form, but certainly it's there. So we are now trying to reconcile some of those remits with what is required to integrate these policies and harmonize them. So we have, as some of you have heard before, we have begun to walk the talk. In a sense, in the 3 sectors that we have committed to taking action. And so the sword, many of you would have read the newspapers or saw it on television, the sword has been turned for a utility scale solar plant to generate approximately 112 megawatts of electricity, which is reported to be the largest in the Caribbean, with ambition to increase that capacity to 30% by 2030, as was announced by the Honorable Prime Minister at COP26 to the UN. Similarly, the Public Transport Service Corporation, again you probably would have read that in the newspaper, has initiated procurement of 240 electric buses that will see emissions further reduced from the CNG initiative that sought to displace diesel in buses. The private sector is also well advanced in establishing a green hydrogen plant which will replace the need for hydrogen derived from natural gas, and I would recognize Philip Julian, who is here and who has been spearheading and championing that transition. So it's a critical transition for us because of the dependency on petrochemicals and exports for our economic well-being. And to complement those initiatives from the private sector, we have also begun to develop a green hydrogen roadmap, including an assessment of the feasibility of wind power, both onshore and offshore, that will be required to power the green hydrogen industries, because as it is now, we don't have enough renewable energy to really categorize and label any hydrogen being produced as totally green. It will have shades of gray in it. So, but as you would appreciate, it's all new to us, given that we are an oil and gas dependent economy. Some things that some people have known all their lives, and so change is always required, and sometimes change is difficult. But what it demonstrates by the actions that we have taken is that we are willing to go boldly and explore new and sustainable frontiers. Of course, indeed, to do otherwise would leave us way behind. Because we already have to play catch up, and in keeping with the need to approach a low carbon or low emission or net zero emissions pathway, development pathway in the future, as required by the Paris Agreement, we have also begun to develop a net zero plan. And it is expected that in the development of that plan, that additional emissions reductions would be required, and therefore opportunities and actions will be identified to raise mitigation ambition consistent with what is required under the Paris Agreement. We are also at the initial stages of developing a carbon pricing policy. All of you would know that of the polluters pay principle, he who pollutes must pay for the environmental and social costs that it incurs. The national environmental policy is premised on the polluters pay principle. Much of international environmental law is premised on the polluters pay principle. On some of the legislation we have, or the EM Act and its rules is premised on the pollution pay principle. But here's a surprise. Carbon pollution in Trinidad continues to be free. No one pays for carbon pollution, and as a result, carbon pricing or putting a price on that pollution is something that is well established internationally and considered to be best practice in terms of providing incentives or disincentives, depending on how you look at it, to reduce emissions further. So we are developing a carbon pricing policy and as well a carbon trading policy as pursuant to the agreements and the decisions taken under the Paris Agreement for market mechanisms in trading carbon. So I don't want to be long. I only have 10 minutes. I'm sure I exceeded it already because I could talk about this for months, as many of you know. Trinidad and Tobago is taking climate action seriously, I want to submit, both from mitigation as well as adaptation perspectives. Of course, to do otherwise would be at our peril. And we are engendering an all-of-government, all-of-society approach because climate change is everybody's business. And you know how they say Trinidadians like to mind people's business? Well, you know, as the enduring sage advice goes, let's mind our own business. And if you want to mind your neighbor's business, that's even better, because that is what is required collectively to address climate action in Trinidad and Tobago. With these few words, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar Singh. A continued round of applause for him as well, especially those initiatives. It warms my heart to see what we're doing at a leadership level to join the fight against climate change. Yes, electric buses all there. That's what we're talking about, man. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, my audience, I beg your patience for a couple of seconds as we're going to adjust and make some seating arrangements, all right? In the meantime, I'm going to ask my DJ to please put on some music for me. I heard some requests from the audience for Megan Thee Stallion, someone else for Vibes Cartel as well. But instead of that, we'll have this. Trying to dance in this pants here, but pressure. All right. Wheel and come again. Actually, don't come again, because we're going to start again right now. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are no doubt gathering, raising awareness and building support are critical to the GST 2023's success and our region's resilience. In addition to being a launchpad for much needed action, it can be a force for good in the fight against climate change. Which is why we are extremely excited about our island's all-in for GST 2023 ambassadors. Yes, our stars, as they too represent another aspect of that force for good in leveraging their expertise, insights, and reach to help spread the word. Tonight we have the opportunity in our next speaker to hear from one such ambassador, Mr. Kalain Hussain, weather anchor at CNC3 and founder of the Trinidad and Tobago Weather Center. Mr. Hussain is a multimedia journalist with Guardian Media Limited and can be seen regularly on the news reporting firsthand on the effects of climate change in our nation and region. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you guys to help me and give me an extra special round of applause because he is taking time away from his important post to be with us here this evening. So please welcome him on stage with an applause like you never applauded before. Yeah, man. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, everybody. Let me just get back to my first slide here. All right. So I was tasked this evening with presenting on climate change in the Caribbean region. But if I were to do that, we would be here all night because of the impacts of climate change. They're so wide that I decided we're going to look at Trinidad and Tobago specifically. So first slide or next slide. Don't know which slide we're on. Somebody tell me. Not up yet. Okay. Well, I'll take this pause to wish everybody a happy Eid, happy Earth Day. Yeah, go strong, go strong. We need that Jeopardy music.
Hi there, I'm Sigourney Masson.
Okay. Cool, great.
As a Global Stocktake Ambassador at the launch of Islands All In for GST 2023. Now, in my field of work, I interact with people who have gone through some of the most severe...
It's not my presentation, but go so good.
These events...
All right, so let's try this again. All right, so we're talking about climate change in Trinidad and Tobago. I know Kishan Kumar Singh said it's very difficult to have a happy Earth Day when you see the impacts changing around us. So next slide. On the heels of COP27, we were all coming back into Trinidad seeing this outside our plane windows. This is the Caroni plains underwater after the deluge of rain we had in November and beginning of December. And even after I spent 3 weeks there reporting, they were there for much longer, fighting for loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation. It's a very difficult thing to have hope when you come back to a country that's underwater and you're still seeing all of these other countries globally willy-nilly with their climate policy. So today, because it's going to take quite a long time to talk about all the impacts of climate change, I'm going to focus specifically on the Trinidad and Tobago context, like I mentioned, so next slide, and talk about it from a meteorological perspective, because there are so many impacts with climate change, from sea level rise to coral reefs impact, agriculture, across so many different sectors. So we're going to talk about the meteorological impacts that we've seen in Trinidad and Tobago, and hopefully you can get some statistics away to go be the climate ambassadors we desperately need across the country. So our first slide, next slide, before we even go into the changes, let's talk about what exactly is our climate in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is largely influenced by its island characteristics. So our mountains, proximity to the equator, our prevailing trade winds, surrounding ocean, and all of the other mountains in the region that modify the weather as it traverses the country. And all of these different types of factors mix into the tropical climate that we experience. So next slide. Trinidad and Tobago has two distinct climate seasons referred to as the wet and the dry season. We are very much in the dry season right now, but after this weekend it might feel like the wet season, especially from Saturday night. You get a preview of the weather forecast. So there's two distinct climate seasons in Trinidad and Tobago, the wet and the dry, and there are some localized differences in these seasons across the two islands, primarily due to the size of our land, our terrain, the elevation, and the orientation of the land as well. So next slide. So in the dry season, we have the tropical maritime climate, next slide, which runs from January, generally. For the last decade, the dry season has been declared in January, and it runs until May, where again, for the last decade, the wet season has been declared. Then, dry seasons generally characterized with cool and warm days, cool nights, warm days, and mostly some localized rainfall with relatively low amounts in the form of those brief passing showers, influenced by the island's proximity to the ocean and sometimes daytime convection. So that's why you may see some pop-up showers along western Trinidad during the afternoon. So now let's talk about the wet season. Next slide. So our wet season is called a modified moist equatorial climate. So next slide. And that typical climate runs from June to December every year. It's warmer, with more hot and humid days and nights, with relatively low wind speeds and increased rainfall. Next slide. So the rainfall during this period is very highly variable in space and time and is characterized by this bimodal pattern due to the equatorial and tropical weather systems, so the ITCZ, tropical waves, tropical cyclones, troughs, you name it, we have it. And during the wet season is also the North Atlantic hurricane season, which typically can affect the southern Windward Islands and Trinidad and Tobago, whether indirectly or directly. So next slide. So Trinidad and Tobago both has a high climate variability from one year to the next. Both seasons are quite variable and prone to the extremes of droughts, dry spells, hot spells, bushfires, intense rainfall, floods. Recently we have hail, tornadoes, funnel clouds, the works. We have a lot going on. But these extremes can actually significantly impact communities, infrastructure, the economy, and the natural environment. Next slide. So how is our climate changing? And that's the question I'm going to answer today using at least meteorology. And for those in the room, we have a lot of familiar faces who have been to COP, who have been following IPCC reports. Their projections from decades ago are already coming to pass, and even with the latest IPCC report, it is at high confidence that we're going to see these things continue. So next slide. First up, I'm going to talk about our temperatures, because this is a factor that meteorologists, climatologists, earth scientists have the highest confidence that anthropogenic climate change is affecting our temperatures. Next slide. So I'm going to start off first with talking about our new climate normals. So when referring to a climatological period, you hear above average, below average. This average is actually the average of whatever factor we're talking about, so in this case temperatures over the last 30 years. So when we ended 2020, this meant we ended a 30-year period, and now there's going to be a new climatological average. And today's reality is much different than 30, 60, or even 100 years ago. So first piece of data. Next slide, please. So Trinidad and Tobago's new average temperature for 1991 to 2020, which is our new climate period, compared to 1981 to 2010, is across the board warmer. According to data from the Meteorological Services of Trinidad and Tobago, they provided a heck of a lot of data for this presentation, so kudos to them. Now, May average temperature is now just as hot as September, with the average temperature, this means the difference between the high and the low, is around 28.5 degrees Celsius. So you could hit next, I think there's an animation. So the National Climate Reference Stations for Trinidad and Tobago is actually Piarco in Trinidad and Crown Point in Tobago. And that, again, the climate reference period is between 1991 and 2020. So during this, in terms of daily average maximum temperatures as well, September is actually our warmest month, with an average maximum temperature of 33 degrees Celsius, and then April, the second warmest month. So thankfully we're ending that, and we haven't seen any extreme temperatures this year, with an average maximum temperature of 32.8 degrees Celsius. The months of May and June both have on average minimum night temperatures of 24.3 degrees, and they're generally the warmer nights on average. So we have some warm nights coming up. And we also have another season that we don't usually talk about called the heat season. This is the period of the year where we see the highest usual temperatures, and that runs from March to October. And the next peak we're actually entering that peak of that heat season. The first peak is April into May, second peak August through the first half of October. And now, I talk a lot about heat and maximum temperatures because with increasing temperatures, it's going to greatly increase the need for cooling in this country. Generally, a cooling day in Trinidad and Tobago is around 26 degrees or above. So the time spent above that is usually when we need to kick on ACs. And this cooling day is a proxy for energy use in Trinidad and Tobago. And over the last 60 years, that cooling day period actually has quadrupled, meaning we now have a demand of energy 4 times as higher as 1960 because of these increased temperatures. So next slide. And this is actually the warming trend for Trinidad and Tobago. Year to year, it is abundantly clear that this country is warming. Every single year since 1986 has been warmer than the 1961 to 1990 climatological average. 2020, which is the last year on this graph, was actually Trinidad and Tobago's 8th warmest year on record. Now, Trinidad and Tobago's maximum surface temperatures have become warmer and warmed at a rate of 24 degrees per Celsius, 24 degrees Celsius, 0.24 degrees Celsius, sorry, per decade since 1946. And that means actually our country is warming 2.5 times higher than the global average. That's not good news for us here in Trinidad and Tobago. And slightly stronger warming trends are observed during the wet season than the dry season. 7 of the 10 last years in Trinidad and Tobago are among the 12 warmest years on record here. And these warm years generally correspond with El Nino events. El Nino events are when the temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, an ocean away from here, is above 0.5 degrees Celsius. This year, we are entering another El Nino event. We've been in a La Nina phase for the last 3 years. And this particular El Nino is at least modeled to be quite strong. March, temperatures are now warming up in the Pacific, and March 2023 is already the second warmest March on record globally. So as this El Nino event ramps up, we are looking to get a particularly hot year this year. Next slide. So now we're going to look at these temperature data disaggregated by decade. And this is going to be the average temperature by decade. So the last 2 decades have been Trinidad and Tobago's warmest decades on record, spanning 2001 to 2010 and 2011 to 2020, with the mean maximum temperatures around mean average temperatures well above the 1961 to 1980 mean. And then looking at the next slide, please. Maximum high average temperatures since 1981, they've all been very much warmer, with the 20th century average increasing. And we have seen that the daily maximum temperatures at Piarco risen about 1.1 degrees Celsius since the turn of the millennium. So, hot days, because we've talked about all of these average temperatures now. When we go outside, we feel temperatures very hot. So may I ask you to go to the next slide, please? When looking at excessive heat nationwide, the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service is recording unusually hot days for the last several decades, with 2011 to 2020 having recorded the highest of 415 days, where the maximum recorded temperature was above 34 degrees Celsius, and unusually hot nights have become more common. Now, this graphic shows the decadal trend of hot days in Trinidad and Tobago from 1960 to 2020. And there's a lot of temperature data that I've shown you, but the trend is clear. We are getting hotter, faster, and that will inevitably have a multitude of knock-on effects for public health, for energy use, water consumption, agriculture, and even more. So the next thing that climate change is affecting meteorologically is our rainfall. Next slide. So climate change is affecting how we see rainfall. And next slide. Most of our rain actually, up to 70% of it. Next slide, please. Thank you. Most of our rain, up to 70% of it, comes from tropical waves. And on that satellite imagery that you're seeing there, that mass of clouds that you're seeing across the Lesser Antilles, if you can point it out on a map, that's a tropical wave, and the rest of it comes from our intertropical convergence zone. Both are features of the wet season. Next slide. So let's talk about our average rainfall before we start talking about the changes. So northeast Trinidad gets the most amount of rain, between 2,000 to 3,000 millimeters a year of rainfall in a year, compared to parts of the western parts of Trinidad and Tobago, which can get as little as 1,300 millimeters a year. Now the wet season, which runs from generally June to December, accounts for 75 to 80% of our annual rainfall. And averaged across the entire country, our total rainfall during the dry seasons is around 412 millimeters, while the wet seasons are around 1,586 millimeters. So generally we see more rain in the east, less rain in the west. That's because a lot of our rainfall, showers, or thunderstorms, the weather that affects Trinidad and Tobago moves in from eastern Trinidad. It interacts with the mountains. Those mountains squeeze out moisture, orographic precipitation, and we see a lot more rainfall, especially in northeastern Trinidad. Next slide, please. But here's the problem. On average, the rainfall at Piarco has decreased very slightly over the last 80-odd years. 2019 was the third driest on record since 1960, and over the last decade, 8 of the last 10 years produced less than average rainfall. Now, we are only in April, yet to see what this year's brings, but we've had an exceptionally dry season. Most of our rainfall in Piarco and Crown Point have been below average consistently since January. Piarco, as it stands yesterday, was only recorded 1.2 millimeters of rainfall for the month of August, which is a very, very little amount. Hence why we're seeing all of these bushfires across Trinidad and Tobago. Now, some parts of Trinidad have experienced greater decreases than others. It's not uniform, and the decrease has only become more pronounced in the last 38 years. So we're talking about 1982 to 2019. And next slide, please. During June through August, this is when we usually see most of our rainfall in Trinidad and Tobago, and there has been a decline in the amount of rain that we receive. This is at Piarco, using the annual averages. And most of our rainfall occurs in the first half of the wet season, and then we're seeing shifts in seasonal rainfall observed. So since 1946, the June, July, and August rainfall has decreased, with the same period over the last decade experiencing 11% less rainfall than that for the 1961 to 1990 period. So we are seeing declines in our overall rainfall during this wettest period of the month, attributed to climate change. And that is in line with the IPCC's projection and what they say with high confidence for the entire Caribbean region. So the problems that we're experiencing in Trinidad, the impacts that we're seeing unfold with our weather, it's not just for Trinidad and Tobago, but the Caribbean region at large. So next slide, please. We're now looking at rainfall by the decade. The mean rainfall totals have decreased at Piarco below the 30-year mean rainfall average from 1961 to 1990 at a rate about 10 millimeters per decade, or 50 millimeters per half century. Now, 2011 to 2020 was the driest decade on record at Piarco since records began at the monitoring site. I'm talking a lot about millimeters and rainfall and all of this, but it's important for Trinidad and Tobago because as it stands right now, between 60 and 70% of our surface water is actually our drinking water. When we run out of surface water, we literally have no drinking water left outside of the desalination plants. WASA, as Kishan mentioned, this climate change risk management, they decided groundwater is more stable to the extreme weather's pattern that we see during the wet and dry season. So they're investing more in groundwater, but then you now have the problem of sea level rise, which could affect our coastal aquifers and make it more saline. And at least 4 of our aquifers have already become too saline to extract from. So we are not in a great position when it comes to rainfall overall. And this is something that we should be cognizant of when we have water restrictions in place. The more water that is in our system, the people on the extremities of our water system can actually access it. So next slide, please. Our changes in our rainfall also is not uniform across the country. The data that you've seen is mostly for Piarco, but this shows us the changes across the entire country. So not all areas are experiencing the same level of dryness, and this across the entirety of Tobago, Trinidad's western and southern halves, we've all seen a reduction of rainfall rather, with rainfall actually increasing across parts of east central and northeastern Trinidad. Now, that's good news for our reservoirs because most of our reservoirs in Trinidad exist either in our south central or eastern parts of the island. In Tobago, the Hillsborough Reservoir, because they've seen the same data, they actually dredged the Hillsborough Reservoir over the last year, adding about 100 million gallons of water. I believe that's the figure that the Public Utilities Minister said. So they are making strides for our water management, but climate change is making it increasingly difficult for us to get drinking water in this country. So like we had new climate normals for temperatures, let's take a look, next slide, of our new climate normals for rainfall. And when we ended 2020, we had a very dry period in 2019, so this didn't come as news to many of us, where we saw that our new climate normals, nearly across the board, is slightly drier. The only month that actually got slightly wetter was March, and that was likely increased due to the severe thunderstorms we had in March 2018 and a couple other Marches prior, where we had some rainfall events that skewed that average up ever so slightly in the last decade. Now, average rainfall for February, January, and December remains unchanged, and notably, all wet season months are now drier than normal. And this is all in line with the IPCC's projections, where overall rainfall has decreased, especially during that June through August period. So, next slide. Now let's talk about extremes, because when that rainfall comes, it comes very, very extreme. The frequency of single-day rainfall events remain fairly steady at Piarco, but at an average of extreme rainfall, meaning 50 millimeters of rainfall or more in a 24-hour period, we're seeing a marginal increase across the board. But from 1985 to present, the average number of extreme single-day rainfall events have trended higher. Based on the records from the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service over the last 35 years, 2020 tied 2008 for the highest number of extreme single rainfall day events in Trinidad and Tobago, with 7 extreme rainfall days. Now, the data is still being crunched for the last 2 years, but we've had significant rainfall events for both of those years, so we'll likely see this trend marginally increase as well. Next slide. And taking a look at the annual extreme maximum one-day rainfall totals for Piarco from 1960 to 2020. In recent years, a larger percentage of rainfall from Piarco has come from intense precipitation, these extremely wet rainfall days. Now, there's been a steady increase of rainfall accumulating in the highest annual daily rainfall totals from this extreme weather. And according to the Met Office, 6 of the highest top 10 years for the highest one-day maximum rainfall totals at Piarco have occurred since 1990. Next slide, please. But similar to the drying trend, this is not occurring uniformly across Trinidad and Tobago. Now, about half show trends, about half of these weather stations from the Met Service across Trinidad and Tobago show trends at lower that is declining. Some are showing trends that are increasing. Those triangles that you're seeing on the map are scaled according to the magnitude of the trend. The solid blue triangles correspond to an increasing trend that is statistically significant, but the unfilled blue triangles are an increasing trend that's not significant, vice versa for the red ones. The solid red triangles, a decreasing trend with a 5% level of decrease versus the red triangles not significantly significant, statistically rather. So next slide, and that was 1 days. We were talking about extreme rainfall, but you know, in Trinidad, when it rains, it pours, and we get a significant amount of flooding across the country that happens over a multi-day period, like we saw last year, October, November, December. Taking a look at the 72-hour period, from 1960 to 2020, there's been an increase in the maximum 3-day totals over the last decade, over the last 6 decades. And when there are high 3-day rainfall totals, Trinidad and Tobago typically experiences very high impact flooding events. So think of Greenvale in 2018, where we saw 250 millimeters recorded at Piarco, but other parts of the country saw upwards to 400 millimeters of rainfall in that 72-hour period. And anything in Trinidad and Tobago, once you hear somebody say it's above 100 millimeters of rain inside 72 hours, cause for concern, flood boots needed. So taking a look at that trend too across the country, next slide please, it's still not uniform. very similar to our one-day trends. Nearly half the stations are showing some increase, half the stations are showing decreases. And how is this extreme precipitation affecting our overall annual rainfall total? Next slide, please. There's been an increase in increasingly wet days or extremely wet days, or days in the top 1% of our daily rainfall accumulations, contributing to our annual rainfall totals. Notably, 2019, which was exceptionally dry, did not produce any extremely wet days, but as a reminder, we had a lot of those in 2021 and 2022. That data is still being crunched, so we'll probably have an updated graphic from the Met Office quite soon. Now, something I wanted to point out, which goes against everything that scientists know about what these projections are showing, next slide please, is that in October, which is in the wet season in Trinidad and Tobago, we actually have an increase in rainfall, which is very surprising because the overall projections are supposed to be a decline. And October has been known to produce some prolific flood events in Trinidad and Tobago, November as well. So we're still, this is under investigation. If I have an answer, watch out for it on CNC3 News. But now I'm getting close to the end of this data pack presentation, and I cannot end it without talking about, next slide please, some Saharan dust. So does it have a link to climate change? Because a lot of us, we knew it's in the air, we know it's here, but you only hear about it recently because myself, Sigoni, Ian Wallace, we all talk about it a lot more on our weather forecasts, and the Met Office has actually launched forecasting tools for air quality and Saharan dust. So next slide, please. So this is actually from the Met Office. They've been tracking Saharan dust for the last several decades, and for Trinidad and Tobago, we see a lot more Saharan dust during the dry season than the wet season, at least through June. That's when we see the highest amount of dust haze days. Those are days that our visibility and air quality will be affected by Saharan dust. And you can see on that graph, there is an increase, quite a significant one. So is this linked to climate change? Next slide, please. Well, that trend is not necessarily settled in science yet. If you go and search Saharan dust climate change on Google or Bing or whichever search engine is your preference, you will get both answers, yes and no. Now, I want to think it end on a happy 8th day, so I'm going to choose NASA's study, which shows we are actually entering a period of a 20,000-year low in Saharan dust moving across the Atlantic Ocean. Why I actually agree with them, and that's bad science to agree and not agree, is that climate change is supposed to make our globe warmer. And that means our oceans are also going to be warmer. When we have a warm Atlantic Ocean, our trade winds are weaker. When we have weaker trade winds, that Saharan dust, when it gets up into the atmosphere of Africa, does not have that tailwind to push it across the Atlantic Ocean and make its way to Trinidad and Tobago or Brazil, where it is a great nutrient beneficent to the Amazon rainforest. So, on a happy end to a happy 8th day, I'm going to say, let's hope Saharan dust stays away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Yes, keep that Sahara dust very far from me. I don't know, my sinuses, I don't know what to do. All right, next up on our agenda is a video message from one of our GST proponents and allies in the cause, coordinator of the independent Global Stocktake Latin America and the Caribbean, Mr. Enrique Martura. Did I get it right, Bianca? I was close enough? All right, so here's what we're going to do now. For more than 18 years, Mr. Enrique has engaged in climate change negotiations and has worked in community-based renewable energy projects and environmental education. He is part of a team that brings together the experience and visions of regional climate advocates to ensure that the global stocktake is as effective and regionally relevant as possible. He joins us here via a special video message, which I invite you to join us in viewing right now.
Hello everyone, very happy to join you, at least virtually. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today. I'm Enrique Maurtua Constantinidis. I am the coordinator for Latin America and the Caribbean for the Independent Global Stocktake, an initiative that is worldwide that tries to strengthen civil society capacities and effective participation into the official global stocktake process of the Paris Agreement. How do we do that? We have different working groups. We work on adaptation, mitigation, means of implementation, and equity that we try as materials and to have work with other organizations around the world. Regionally, we work in Latin America and the Caribbean, which I am honored to coordinate, and West Africa and Southeast Asia. In these regions, we try to strengthen the level of understanding of organizations of this process, which sometimes seems to be very particular, very unique, very in a niche. So this is something that we try to do with different activities such as webinars, meetings, and different gatherings to ensure and produce different products to explain to civil society and the public in general what this global stocktake is. And that we are, in particular in Latin America and the Caribbean, we are developing a regional assessment. We chose 15 countries that we will assess, and this assessment will come up in the next couple of months, trying to do our own assessment of how things are and where the opportunities for our countries to leverage climate ambition. So we want to make sure that our countries are accountable. We want to make sure that the global community is accountable and that this GST can actually produce outcomes that are very useful for enhancing more stronger NDCs that can get us closer to achieve the 1.5 degree we want to have a safe climate. So why is it important that civil society engages? Civil society plays a key role at the UNFCCC, and this is not only speeches. We were the drivers of many of the things that happen, many of the policies, many of the outcomes of this convention and the Paris Agreement. So we need to be part of this process as well. We are the ones that can actually have more information and reality checks on the ground on what is going on and what is needed. So that is why civil society engagement is super important for this process. And this is something that we will continue pushing, not only in our region, but to make sure that this year, the Global Stocktake also has a very particular and very needed participation of civil society and an outcome that reflects that. Because the next round of NDCs, the next round of commitments of the Paris Agreement by countries need to have the civil society participation as well if we want to address the new targets with equity and with the people inside of those targets. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful meeting today. Next time I really hope I can make it and be there with you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Enrique. Excellent. Excellent indeed. All right, moving on, our final address is from a particularly vocal member within the national community on issues such as climate change and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are also very proud to have her on board with Ghislaine as our Islands All In for GST 2023 ambassador. Ms. Sigoni Mohammed, senior multimedia journalist, presenter, and producer, provides expertise in meteorology, the SDGs, disaster risk reduction and resilience, and the environment to the One Caribbean Media Network and the public at large. While she couldn't be here with us this evening, we are fortunate to have a video presentation from her as she shares some of her insights and perspectives on climate change in the Caribbean. Let's please have a look and listen.
Hi there, I'm Sigoni Mohammed. You probably know me from CCN TV6, but tonight it's my pleasure to address you as a Global Stocktake ambassador at the launch of Islands All In for GST 2023. Now, in my field of work, I interact with people who have gone through some of the most severe weather events in the last decade across the region. These events are the main reasons for understanding why and how people cope. Think about it like this. If you ever experience an extreme weather event, it allows you to prepare for the next one. Now, I would know because it happened to me just a few months ago. Imagine being called to find out that your home is underwater in an area that has never flooded before. And this is where building resilience becomes important in climate change discussions. For too long, our generation has witnessed country being reactive rather than proactive, such that they wait for something to happen and then they try to address it. How long can we stay at getting good at managing crisis rather than risks? And that's where the Global Stocktake is introduced as a critical juncture to take a long, hard look at the state of our planet, our region, and our community, and chart a better course for the future. Now, GST, as you've heard earlier, involves looking at everything related to climate action and support, identifying gaps, and working together to agree on solutions and pathways that take us beyond 2023. Essentially, it is international developmental agendas like GST that have seen increased efforts for disaster risk management strategies to be included in national development plans. However, as a specialist and a good friend of mine in the field of DRR once told me, a policy without implementation is just old talk. So to adapt to a warmer world and preserve people, ecology, wealth, and our way of life, we must address climate change. Understanding, strategizing, and acting in a way that lessens negative effects and generates new chances to become safer and more resilient are all necessary components of achieving this ambition. Nearly half of the world's population is already vulnerable to climate impacts, and you know the implications. Extreme occurrences like heat waves and droughts are being brought on by it, and it is also altering rainfall patterns, melting ice, and disrupting habitats. Due to climatic effects, the IPCC declared the need to accelerate the transition to green energy and transform agriculture and eating habits if it has any chance of making the necessary cuts in emissions across the world. But merely slowing down climate change will not be enough. We also need to prepare for its inevitable effects. Inaction today will make adaptation more expensive and challenging for future generations. And that's where DRR plays a role in ambition. Exposure must be minimized. Vulnerability must be decreased, and capacities for recovery and resilience must be increased to lower disaster and climate risks. People need to understand that risk is something that we need to manage, and when we employ structural and non-structural policies, we can reduce risks and vulnerability. Far too often, we are caught up in cycles of recovery and immediate response, but we never really deal with the risk. To change or adjust to something, we first need to understand it. The new way of thinking is that when people are affected, they need to be involved in building resilience. At-risk groups, especially poorer communities, are impacted severely. Think about the disabled, elderly, children. These communities are also at risk for climate change matters. And a lot of people are concerned about seeing after tomorrow, assessing the necessary resources to get them through just another day or another week, when many times their focus does not go beyond a week, but tackling DRR and climate change and ambition, it requires more time. The most crucial information is that small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago needs to speed up the transition to the future, develop solutions, and enable conditions for citizens, communities, and regions to be better able to comprehend, plan for, and manage climate hazards as a result. But the management of anything requires discipline. Given the exposure to information and conferences on GST like this, we get to look at the Caribbean and SIDS and our vulnerability. The outlook? Well, we are in an age ripe for implementation, and it can be done with the right attitude. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned, the climate time bomb is ticking. The possibility and probability of disasters occurring exist, and because of that existence, we should be prepared. Proactive, not reactive.
Islands all in for GST 2023 Ambassador Segoni Mohammed, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, a positive voice in the fight against climate change. All right, moving on now. Having heard from our people behind the scenes and on the front lines, at this time we would like to hear from you guys. Yes, you guys in our audience right here this evening. We're going to have a quick question and answer segment, right, for some brief questions. Now note, if it's not a question and just a contribution, it's more than welcome. But if it is a question, we have our speakers right here to answer any questions that you might have. So at this point in time, I do want to turn the floor over to you guys. Don't all stand at once. Yes.
My question is along the independent global stocktake, the Latin American Caribbean, which particularly which Caribbean islands are being represented? Because straight up in these kind of balances, the Caribbean will kind of get a short change in the whole Latin America Caribbean vibe. So just want to make sure enough Caribbean islands are in this whole, what was it, 13 or 15 countries being independently reviewed. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Haynes?
Hi, Chandel. No, it's a really good question. And it's also the question we had when we were approached by Enrique and representatives of the Independent Global Stocktake, because they are supposed to be speaking on behalf of and doing an assessment of Latin America and the Caribbean. But at the time, when they approached us, they didn't really have any Caribbean representation. And so this is why we've been working with the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute and their Climate Justice Alliance to have the outputs from that process feed directly into what the Independent Global Stocktake for Latin America and Caribbean is doing. In addition to that, they are reviewing, in their review of the region, they have included a few Caribbean islands. I believe Trinidad and Tobago is one of them. Colin, who are the other three? Jamaica, Belize, and St. Lucia. So in terms of the actual stocktake, the actual assessment that they're doing, they do have some Caribbean representation, but also it was really important for us to ensure that the perspectives from the Caribbean region were able to feed into that process. When we first met with them, the process was really much more focused on mitigation work and what's happening in Latin America specifically on that issue, and there's significantly less work on that happening in the Caribbean. They didn't necessarily have an adaptation perspective. They weren't necessarily speaking about climate justice, for example. And through the Climate Justice Alliance of civil society organizations, we've tried to get those perspectives included. So thank you for that.
All right. Any further questions? Comments? All are welcome. We have one gentleman in the back there. Microphone's coming over.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just two questions. The first is on the policy perspectives. I know that there's a couple of changes that we have happening. One is the utility scale solar projects that are on board, and it's expected with that we're going to see some utility scale batteries maybe in the future and behind the meter battery systems. Has any thought been put into looking at policies beyond net metering? Because I could see it creating an incentive to pull people to engage in renewable energy technologies if you're able to be paid for it as a resource. So for example, if you have a behind-the-meter battery system, you could actually be paid for helping the grid maintain itself, shaving peaks during the day and night when you actually have to bring on new generation, which burns more natural gas, right? That is a way to kind of embed energy efficiency into the process. So in terms of the policy perspective, is that a possible consideration? And the other one as well, more for, Ms. Haynes, in terms of working with Caribbean utilities, because I work in the power and utility sector, and it is an advantage for us to consider renewable energy technologies to be integrated into our systems. However, there are also challenges with it because the incentives is a little bit skewed. So to include those technologies in there, there's a lot of support that utilities will need. So working with organizations like CARILEC, which is the Caribbean utilities, coming together to help them in terms of forming solutions to kind of support the integration of renewable energy technologies on the grid. Yep. Thank you.
All right. And to answer, yes, I would invite my speakers back on stage to answer. Yes, just so we get the optics proper, you know. Help out my camera crew in the back there.
Right, thank you for the question, and I'm sure if I interpret it properly, you're talking about a feed-in tariff framework. Yeah, so the short answer is yes, a feed-in tariff policy has been developed and going through the last fine-tuning phases for hopefully adoption by the cabinet. At some point you would have probably heard the Prime Minister at the soft-turning ceremony also referring to developing a legislative framework to implement the policy that would see householders, domestic consumers, small-scale commercial also benefiting from the feed-in tariff policy. There's already, in fact, tax concessions for solar PVs that was in place since 2011, believe it or not. That hasn't includes a 150% VAT on some commercial installations. So there's a bit of the cart before the horse, but I think we've got it together now. Yeah, going forward.
Ms. Haynes.
Hi, Brendan. Repeat the second question, please.
The incentive is really about reliability and resilience, and maybe not necessarily about renewable energy integration. That might be a little bit second.
Okay.
I think there's millions that could happen across all the utilities because some in the Caribbean are much further than others. And if we could come together and share knowledge, I think it will benefit overall, especially for like us who are just beginning and there are others who are further along. So if that is like part of the consideration and stuff as well, because I know a lot of the utility sector is right for this sort of innovation, and then the NDCs are aligned to power utilities as well.
Short answer, yes. Yes, I will say that there is a lot of international interest building around this idea of a just energy transition in the Caribbean. And around the idea of supporting a just energy transition in the Caribbean. The government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands is going to be hosting a conference in Aruba next month in May, where they will be focusing on this. We are hoping that they will be inviting regional organizations, including like CARILEC and SICRI and others into the discussion because it will be on this question of what exactly are the barriers that are preventing countries of such a small size with particular types of economies from being able to transition, and how can we share experiences, best practices and lessons learned in terms of identifying solutions. Climate Analytics Caribbean is hoping to be able to support in that conference as well, and we hope that this will become a much more expanded area of our work in the future. But we are not-for-profit, so we are reliant on funding and funders in order to be able to do this work. So short answer, yes. Long answer, well, was a long answer. Thanks.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. Yes. And she will get that microphone to you.
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you all for all our speakers for giving us those presentations. But I did have a question for Mr. Kumar Singh. I'm very happy to hear that we have policy and legislation in development, but I wanted to know what is the timeline for that, because as we've heard from our weatherman, who gave a very in-depth presentation, the impacts are here and they're advancing quickly. So when can we expect Trinidad to be really leading in this and making these changes? One in the feed-in tariffs, as well as the carbon trading and the carbon pricing. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I had indicated earlier, the policy and legislative is a critical prerequisite for climate action. So we already have a national climate change policy, as you know, that is being updated It should be sent to cabinet very shortly. It's now getting professionally proofread to make sure that the commas are in the right place and so on. And the right words are used, of course. So that will be going soon to cabinet, at least to the minister. Beyond that is beyond my pay grade, and I can't say when. But that's reality, unfortunately. But the other policies, the just transition policy, for example, has been submitted to cabinet, waiting approval. The e-mobility policy is in the final stages, but with the e-mobility policy, it's a bit of a strange creature because some things overtook while the policy was being developed. So all of the fiscal incentives already were implemented. So we had to revisit, we had to go back and sort of fix it because there was no point in making recommendations in a policy that was already implemented. So we had to tweak it, keep tweaking it all the time. And then we had to also analyze some of the critical non-technical barriers, like cultural acceptability. We heard, for example, people say if you drive through a flood, you will blow up and kill everybody. I don't know who will drive any vehicle in a flood, but that's some of the old wives' tales that you get. And so addressing some of those barriers and analyzing them was a critical step. Again, we had to go back and forth and sort of continuously tweak it. But we are at the stage of finalization. It will be proofread again within the next month in prep for submission. The feed-in tariff policy, I think I answered the question. That's, I think it was some years in the making. I think all of the data that was required to fine-tune the implementation part of the policy have already been analyzed, and as far as I understand, we're not leading it. The Ministry of Planning is not leading it, but we collaborate with others. As far as I understand, the Ministry of Energy is in the final stages of putting that together again for submission. So again, I can't stress enough that the policy and legislative framework, the institutional framework, is a critical prerequisite. And if you get that wrong, then everything that flows from it will be a little bit flawed. So we're making sure that all of the issues are addressed in the way they should be addressed to facilitate smooth action, climate action going forward. Yeah, thank you.
Good answer. Nice. Like that. Dance them good. All right, a quick announcement. PBT 8200. PBT 8200. Unfortunately, your car's just been towed. I'm kidding. Your lights are on. That's all. Don't worry. It's Friday. We're enjoying ourselves, man. Time for one more question. It comes from over here. Shay. Yes. Ladies first. What a gentleman. Yes. Nice. One more? He has one as well. I think let's squeeze in one more. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, greetings everyone. Happy Earth Day as we celebrate life and celebrate Earth. This question is for my friend here, Rihanna from Climate Analytics. As far as I notice, you continue to partner with my friend here from planning and from the Met and all the top-down players in the environment. I want to know what plans you have for the bottom-up group there, civil society groups, the education sector, and so on, as it relates to climate change, as it relates to adaptation, mitigation, and even, awareness to get the people on the ground, the small man on the ground, to play a positive role as it relates to climate change. Thanks.
Great question.
Hi, Akila. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the wonderful question. We have all the plans. And we started so far with the partnership that we graciously had with you and with the Institute, on the paper that we prepared on indigenous farming and the contribution that indigenous farming practices can make to adaptation efforts. But this is just the very beginning. We are hoping to expand much more broadly. We have plans to work with the Brasso Secco community, for example, to look at the work that they are doing in the context of, as a means of generating solutions and at a community level to address climate change adaptation and to build resilience. In the context of this project, we have so much coming down the line. We are planning for a school competition to encourage the youth to get involved and to use their imaginations in order to, be able to develop solutions to the problems that are at hand and that will be affecting them greatly. We have a very senior representative of the Scouts Association here with us, and that is not by chance. I probably messaged Mark about 15 times to remind him to come here because we have so much to discuss, and we do want to work with the Scouts as an organization that is very well respected, very well established, and has been working successfully over the years to involve the youth in community work and involve them in activities that will also contribute to their development. In addition to this, as a part of this entire campaign on the Global Stocktake, we will be developing a documentary where we hope to showcase very specifically stories from the community level of climate action in the region, and we won't just be in Trinidad and Tobago. We're also hoping to go to Belize as well as St. Lucia to interview actors at the community level and involve them in this conversation that we're having. Akila, I'm so glad you're here because I hope we can also interview you. So there is a lot that's coming down the line in terms of, Bianca's reminding me. Yes, so we do have a community project sponsorship that is going to be happening as part of the activities for this particular campaign on raising awareness on the GST. Let me just say that Climate Analytics Caribbean was really the idea behind establishing a climate analytics office under this very global brand in the region to serve the region was in order to be able to take that well-established northern global brand that's associated with certain things and to use that to be able to channel resources and channel attention to our level and to our people here in the region. Because as we know, in the context of the climate change discussion, one of the major gaps that has occurred in relation to climate finance is being able to channel that finance where it needs to go. And where it needs to go, in my opinion, is to the people who can make a real difference, the people who are active in the communities, the people who are on the ground, who see the problems day by day, who are in the best position to fashion solutions that will be sustainable and that will leave no one behind. So that's very much a part of our mandate and a part of how we understand our mission in the context of working on climate justice. So thanks so much for the question.
Great answer, and gentlemen, over there. You can join me on stage. Yeah, man.
Hello? Okay.
All right.
Great. Just want to say good night, everybody. Happy Earth Day. And it's not really a question. I just wanted to make a statement and just kind of speak from the heart and just kind of bring a lot of intention into this room. I could see that we're all in here because we have a love for what we do and we have a love for Earth, a love for home. And I just wanted to open up the forum and just kind of spread the positive energy throughout this room and, give a lot of goodwill to everybody who here is fighting for our planet, fighting for everything. And yeah, everything starts with intention. And so blessings to everybody. And I'm blessed to be in this room on this beautiful day. And yeah, big up.
Excellent contribution. That's what we're looking for. All right. Now, Bianca might buff me, but my word is my promise. So we have one more question right over here. Shay? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Mark Ainsley, National Scout Commissioner. Panelists, thank you very much for your talk. It's a question and a comment. I'd like to know, as the leader of the largest youth organization in our country, I listened to everything everybody said, and I sat thinking that we needed to hear more young people, what their thoughts are as it relates to planning and development, as it relates to climate analytics, and as it relates to our weather. So the question is, how can the Scout Association of Trinidad and Tobago and our young people get involved in all three aspects of your lives and what you do?
All right.
So I may look old, but I'm 26, so I like to consider myself a youth. No, but on a real though, when students or teachers want people like us to come and speak to them, I always do it. I always make time to speak to students, speak to schools. For them to get involved in weather, the Met Office might be the best people to actually contact, do school tours with them, and they are very knowledgeable about the things that they do, whether it's actual weather or climate, giving climate change solutions and that, or data rather, talking about all the fun stuff that they actually do. They send balloons up every morning that goes to the top of our atmosphere, the instruments that they are building within the Met Office, the data that they collect, and they're by the airport so the children get to see some planes. But when it comes to climate action, that is definitely something that would be something that we would have to like speak to them about, try to simplify it for them, and them getting involved with us would usually require, we sitting down and talking with them a little bit and coming up with activities for them to be aware of the impacts of climate change, but also not scaring them. So, because it is a scary topic. Hand over to Ruan.
It's a terrifying topic. In terms of getting the youth involved, could I have the members of the Climate Analytics Caribbean team stand? Bianca is at the back on her phone. So, a few things. I smell a partnership coming. We have all been very involved in trying to educate as many people as possible on this issue as we have the opportunity to. Each member of the team has been involved in various activities and initiatives, talks. I've been to churches. We've been around the place trying to talk to anybody who invites us at any point in time about what is going on. And we are very, very happy to do so much more and more than that, including in the context of a specific program that we can establish with the Scouts Association. Look at these faces. They're all youngish, young people. I'm probably the most youngish in the bunch. We would be very, very happy to actually, as a follow-up to this work that we are doing, design a program specifically for advancing climate change education with the Scouts Association of Trinidad and Tobago as the largest youth association in the country. And to be able to, I guess, ensure that the work that you are doing, in the context of the work that you are doing, that there is an awareness of the broader context for that work and to try to align our objectives as much as possible. In addition to that, Colleen did say that he is 26, he's very young. It's part of the reason why we chose him as one of the GST ambassadors, understanding that there is a need really to, I think this comes back to Akida's question, there is a need really to address this perspective that these issues are very top-down, very up there, very, these are the people at the top, these are the people who travel and go to all these exotic places to have these meetings and to make it local and make it real for people on the ground who are experiencing the impacts, especially those who are on the front lines. And I can tell you that the latest report from the IPCC is extraordinarily grim from the perspective of the youth. not only is climate change already happening now, not only is it that all of us who are already here will be experiencing some of the worst impacts if we continue on the trajectory that we are on, but young people, especially those who've been born within the last 5 to 10 years, young people are likely to live in a radically different, climate-ravaged world for the rest of their lives. So in the context of what Kishan is saying, where for some people, coral reefs will be something that they talk about the way we talk about dinosaurs, the reality is quite grim for young people on the ground. So they are a constituency that we consider, and we look forward to working with you, Mark. Kishan, your turn.
And the order of responses was a deliberate descending order of youth. But it gives me the opportunity to share some experiences. So when you talk about getting youth involved, I think youth, however it is defined, has one thing going for them, and that is passion, once they identify a cause. And so igniting passion for advocacy, I think Ruana spoke about advocacy in terms of how best can the individual contribute to the cause, is one way of doing it. But how do you ignite that passion is also dependent on how it is approached. A good scare perhaps works, but let me give you my own story. I started following climate change when I was 22 years old. Not too long ago, of course, but and I started off as a hobby because I was intrigued by the science. In those days, I couldn't Google. You couldn't Google, so I had to go to the library and do those manual searches for research journals and so on. But I started as a hobby. It turned out to be my career. I don't know if that's fortunate or misfortune. But the point is, even at this age, with all of that passion and research and yearning to learn, I would hardly consider myself anywhere near expert or knowing enough, because it's continuously evolving. So the place to start with the youth, of course, is an understanding, imparting an understanding and igniting a passion, because then that can take them, the world is their playground. After that, climate change used to be a scientific, it used to be an environmental thing when it started off in my time. It is now a legal thing, it's an economic thing, it's a social thing, it's a cultural thing, it's an environmental thing, it's everything. So I think with that understanding, I think with that framework, then engaging the youth, you have more options to do it. But I think first and foremost, igniting the passion, and for advocacy, more than anything, holding leaders accountable, holding politicians and policymakers accountable for their future, I think is one of the most critical things that is required of the youth today. And that should be encouraged, not discouraged. Thank you.
And I believe that deserves a round of applause. Yes. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A session, so moving quickly along. The final item on our agenda is something quite unique and particular to the GST Caribbean campaign, and it comes to us via Carver Bacchus. Now, Mr. Bacchus is the founder and director of Green Screen Film Festival and the founder of Sustain TNT. The video that you're about to see is an introduction of the Green Screen Film Festival special selection and features 5 powerful short Caribbean films. We now invite you to relax and take in this special video presentation. Welcome to Movie Town.
Hi, everybody. And thanks to the Climate Analytics Caribbean team for inviting me to say a few words before the screening of our Climate Action film series this evening. At Sustain TNT and Green Screen, we believe that in order to facilitate concerted action across sectors, we have to understand the issues. We have to understand what is at stake, and we have to understand how we can respond. This short series of films brings messages of climate impacts and responses across in a variety of ways, from lightheartedly, showing how much we consume and callously throw away in Dominique Chung's Another Man, the winner of the People's Choice Award in our very short shorts competition in 2019, to a more serious take through Changing the Game, a short documentary produced by Sustain TNT in collaboration with the UNDP Jeff SGP that highlights the work of teachers and students at Poverty Girls High School in Debe, who created the country's first climate change education board game. So this film presentation with Climate Analytics Caribbean is a natural one. We're all working towards the same goal, to protect our Caribbean communities from the worst impacts of climate change. The science has been telling us that business as usual will see us overshoot the tipping point of a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures. If this happens, it will further accelerate sea level rise, create conditions for more intense storms, and other changes that will make living in our region more difficult for everyone. We do hope that you enjoy the short film presentation and then take the time to reflect on your own environmental impacts. And we hope that you can join the network of people and organizations who are working toward changing business as usual in order to protect what we have now and ensure the next generation looks at us with admiration for our response to these climate challenges. Thank you, and do enjoy the films.
Trees are very hardworking, but they don't get the respect they deserve because they appear to be just standing around. But trees actually provide very important services. Trees with large leaf surface areas absorb harmful gases which clean the air. Forests store enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, which helps slow climate change. In our country, progress sometimes takes priority over the natural balance. Concrete replaces trees in many places. With less trees to shelter the land, rainfall washes along the earth faster, carrying topsoil and swelling rivers, leading to flooding. The roots of trees play an important role in holding the soil together and preventing it from being washed away by wind or rain. Forests also help to purify our water. Well-managed forests help to reduce storm runoff, which in turn helps keep local rivers free from pollutants like fertilizers. In fact, many forested areas should be managed with the goal of maintaining their watershed health, like the Fonds Amans area in St. Anne's. For more information on the planting and nurturing of trees, contact the Fonds Amans Community Reforestation Project, the FACRP, by email facrp1@yahoo.com or call 750-1716. Plant trees. Our world changes constantly. Pay attention long enough and you will see the seasons change from dry to wet. The Earth's climate is also changing, but not always in ways that you can see. The average temperature of our Earth is getting warmer as we continue to put gases into the atmosphere that trap heat, mostly through the burning of fossil fuels. Cooking gas, heating gas, planes, trains, cars, factories, even lawnmowers operate on fossil fuels. Warmer temperatures are creating conditions for more powerful storms. Our Caribbean region has been experiencing more severe storms in the past 10 years. Hurricane Ivan in 2004 cost the Cayman Islands billions of dollars in damages and lost revenue. Higher temperatures also cause seawater to heat up slightly, and small temperature changes such as these in the sea can have devastating effects on marine life, especially our coral reefs. These changes are happening because the Earth's land, air, and water are all connected to its climate. So what can we do? Preserve wetlands that can store water and protect coastlines. Improve drainage systems. Avoid building homes in flood-prone areas. Avoid the overdevelopment of hillsides and the displacement of valuable soil-protecting tree cover. Take action.
I am the principal of Parvati Girls Hindu College. It is difficult to really pinpoint a time when I decided I wanted to be an educator, because I know in my young days, my family still teased me a lot about it. I hated school. I did not even want to go to school. Every day I would hide my book wherever, so I would not have to go to school. But somewhere along the line, I started to get teachers who cared a little more and made the classroom different. And those are the teachers who impacted on me. So I tell my teachers even now that teaching makes such a difference to a child. One teacher could make a difference. And this is why we all go to the classroom and we have to put out our 100%. We might make a difference to one child. Parvati Girls Hindu College is a secondary school. It is located in Debe, and we are under the management of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, which is a Hindu board, but all students of all races and all cultures, all religions are welcome here. We get very, very good responses about the reputation of the school. Parents come in here on a daily basis, and sometimes I have lines come in, they want to get transferred into the school. And why do they want to get transferred into the school? They see the discipline of our students. When they are outside, parents say that they can recognize a Parvati girl.
I love my parents, my teachers, my leaders, and my elders, and those in authority.
I truly believe that we are producing a well-rounded student. And a good example is what we are doing with the ClimaQuest game. This game was produced within the classrooms. So at the end of the day, all our Form 4s, Form 5s, the lower school, they would all have participated in some way towards that game.
It was a group of teachers and students came up with the idea of the game. And 4 teachers, we sat down and we were thinking, okay, how can we teach children about climate change? What do they need to know? How can we make this more appealing to them? So we brainstormed, we sat there on evenings, on weekends, Our holidays for the last 2 years, I would say, we gave up.
I want to buy that. What's first?
Climate Quest is an edutainment game that teaches children ages 9 to 19 about the causes, effects, and solutions to climate change, and specifically how it affects small island developing states, especially Trinidad and Tobago.
The sun is shining and there's light in the sky. The breeze is breathing and the earth is alive. And all around me there is life to be felt. This could be Eden again.
Always use public transport. It is cheaper, reduces carbon dioxide emissions, and you meet new people.
I see the board game as an educational tool. So many topics are taught in classrooms, and the students do not truly understand. They leave the classroom just as they entered. You know, they did not understand anything that the teacher said. The teacher may have taught the lesson, but did the child learn the lesson? And so, with the board game, they can practice in class, they can revise at home, they have their peers working with them so they can discuss the topics, and so it makes it more alive.
This could be Eden again, oh Eden again. A living garden and a paradise for men. I'm singing Eden again, oh Eden again. And then when we know that we'll make this Eden again.
I think that game is really fun because I rather play that game than sit down in a boring classroom. Like, oh my God, seriously.
I would have loved to have things like this when I was in school. My days in school was days of the black and white book with no pictures. That would have made a tremendous difference to me.
If you don't know anything about climate change and global warming, if you play this game once or twice, you would eventually learn a lot about it.
As a teacher, what worried me a lot was that when students were being taught about climate change in classrooms, they were taught about how it affects the polar bears, how it affects the ice caps, how it affects the rise in sea levels. There was very little about how it affects our small island developing states, our endangered species, our leatherback turtles, our manatees, our golden tree frogs. And I wanted there to be a difference in the way in which it was taught.
We bandied around a few names. It was a quest. It was a quest for knowledge. And it was about climate change. We felt it was a nice play on the words, and it worked well for us.
What endangered or protected species of animals in the Caribbean is affected by global warming?
The golden true frog, leatherback turtle, and the manatees.
Correct.
When I play, I usually win. I make sure I win.
The earth is singing and she's dancing along. Some try to stop her, but she still dances on. I look up on this and I think to myself, this could be Eden again.
Climate Quest may be a game used in the classroom to teach, but it really is a social tool as well. It is something that can change lives. It can make very passive children very active. It can make shy children very bold. It can make children that lack confidence gain that confidence because it is within an environment that allows you to shine. That is the environment where you play a game.
There was one student who was playing the game. He was a student who had some difficulty in terms of being accepted in the classroom. He was one of the slower students, and you could see that he felt that. And during the game, the students who were playing with him made him develop confidence. And at the end of the game, he was confident, he was willing to play, he was more talkative, he felt as if this game empowered him.
I see that game, that Climate Quest game, in every household in Trinidad eventually. And imagine our girls can say, you know, I was part of creating that. And I expect to see it internationally. I want this to grow where somebody will say, you want to get a gift for a child? This is the perfect gift.
This could be Eden again, oh Eden again. A living garden and a paradise for men. I'm singing Eden again, oh Eden again. And then when we know that we could make this Eden again.
If I had to say anything going forward in this, I would encourage teachers to get involved in things like these. They make a difference. Students really do follow what we do and not what we say.
A small school from Debe, whom very little people know about, can make a big change in the world, can change people's attitudes towards climate change, people's attitudes towards the environment, can influence choices they make later on in life.
For me, I love making a difference to the young girls at this stage of their lives. I see women as having a major role to play in society. I mean, they are the bedrock, to use a cliche, of society. A woman is a mother. Every woman hopes to be a mother at some time. And just being a mother, you can share. So we have a multiplier effect on anything that we teach here. All the values of discipline, all the morals, whatever we teach, I can see that multiplier effect affecting the society and injecting positivity.
If I do see my dad or my sister throwing garbage on the side of the road or something, I will tell them about it and say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to start with yourself in order to prevent these effects of climate change and all that, you know. So you need to begin with you. You know, change starts with you.
This could be Eden again, oh Eden again. A living garden and a paradise for men. I'm singing Eden again, oh Eden again. And then when we know that we could, we'll make this Eden again. And let's make this Eden again.
Yes, I believe that's our last video. So let's get a round of applause for those videos, those positive messages, those children. That game, is it Climate Quest is the name of the game? Say it again a little louder. Right, that game. Yes, we like that game. And that song, Eden again. This could be Eden again. Yeah. Thank God, my friends, this could be Eden again. Is that copyrighted, by the way? Or can I go with, I could just take that and, no? I can't just go with that at all? Sure? All right, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end. Yes, to the end of this evening's formal proceedings, and I believe we have had much food for thought. I'm hopeful, that we have also had much cause to act. All right? I believe that today's launch is a clear signal of the intent to truly make Islands all in for GST 2023 what it is destined to be, and actionable plan for a sustainable and protected future. Special thanks to this evening's speakers, Ms. Haynes, Ms. Kumar Singh, Mr. Hussain, Mr. I said Ms. Kumar Singh. You see, boy, Timas boy was going good for the whole thing, you know, at the end, and he's done. Mr. Kumar Singh, sorry, all right. Mr. Martura and Ms. Mohammed for sharing their time, insight, and experiences with us. I ask that you please remain close by for some photo ops. You know, we got to make those moments last forever. Thanks to the Green Screen Film Festival founder and director, Mr. Bacchus, for so engagingly sharing an important vision through the creative and green lens. To our venue hosts for the work in facilitating what has certainly turned out to be an enjoyable event. A very special thanks to the members of the media who have joined us here today. As always, we are counting on your support in the months to come as we ramp up the messaging and place the GST narrative more firmly into the national and social discourse. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for taking your time to share with us today. We hope we have made some powerful connections here, connections that we can build upon as we move forward and demonstrate the power of Islands all in for GST 2023. I believe this was a Friday evening well spent. Do stay on to join us for some refreshments. And in anticipation of tomorrow's holy day, I would like to say Eid Mubarak to you all. And of course, may you have a happy and purpose-driven Earth Day 2023. Who wants to get some wine? I know I do. Ladies and gentlemen, give yourselves a round of applause. This brings us to the end of this evening's proceedings.